Hey guys, welcome back to the weekly Warrior Wellness Checkup. I'm sorry it's been a minute. The last few weeks have just been crazy, and it seems like every week something has popped up that has needed my attention more than this. But I'm really excited to get back into it, and I have a lot to say today, so I'm just going to get started. This week we're talking about anxiety and how that presents itself in people, how we manage it, and the stigma around talking about it. It parlays into yoga primarily because a lot of people will tell you that yoga is a cure-all to anxiety, and that stresses me out because that's not the case. While it's a great tool to utilize for anxiety management, it's definitely not going to completely eradicate it in humans, and when people tell you it will, that makes me nervous. Two, as I said, I could talk about this topic for days, and mainly because of all the time that I spent not talking about it. Hear that again. I have a lot to say about it because of all the time I spent not talking about it. So let's start there. I was probably an adult with a child before my mom or grandma ever talked to me about any type of issues they had with postpartum or anxiety or depression or anything like that. Growing up in my household, we did not talk about mental health. I just turned 34 this year. I feel like maybe the generation directly after me probably still falls in this, and then after that, it slowly starts to improve. But I know for me, we didn't talk about it at all. Not depression, not anxiety, not any of it really. It was just kind of it didn't come up. As a child, I definitely had it as a child, but I was just always called, a nervous kid or a worried kid when I had anxiety. Now, I'm not shading my mom and dad or grandparents because it just wasn't a thing then. We didn't talk about it. We didn't take our kids to the therapist unless, something really traumatic happened, and that was it. So I was just a nervous kid. That presented itself in all kinds of ways as a child. I would panic over and over about the doors being locked. If we traveled, I just knew we were all going to die. Every time it was time to go to bed, I literally would just lose my shit about the smallest thing that had happened that day. It was, I knew something was wrong. The timeline of how I've handled it has been like this. When I finally became a young adult in my early 20s, I drank. Any negative feeling I had, which was all primarily anxiety related, I attempted to drink away. It did not matter what it was, I was going to try to drown it. Now, obviously, if you've ever attempted to do that also, you know that doesn't end well. So I practically almost killed myself, just drinking all of my stuff away when really I should have been in therapy. My next move, when I finally got into a form of therapy because I realized what I was doing was going to end my life, they wanted to put me on some type of pharmaceutical to help me. Coming off of just being addicted to alcohol, I was not excited about the thought of being put on medicine. Now, I realize now that there are a lot of options, where they're not addictive and it's not a dependent type of situation. But at that point, I was nervous and I opted to not do that and decided that I was going to handle it different ways. And I spent a lot of time in that phase. I've done a lot of different things. I'm a firm believer that if you choose to not be on pharmaceuticals, there are a lot of things that when used in conjunction with one another are very helpful, such as yoga, meditation, breathing practices, kapaba, CBD, therapy. I could go on and on. There are a ton. Now, I'll also say that I don't feel like any of those things are a cure-all. You definitely have to take the time and really understand what works best for you. and go with that. As I said, I spent a lot of time in that phase where I got, really good at breathing my way out of a panic attack, grounding myself outside, doing laps around a building, breathing. It's funny, not really funny, but it's funny because if you also struggle with extreme anxiety, you'll know that you literally spend most of your time talking yourself in and out of things. For example, I spend so much time talking myself into making phone calls, walking into Target. And on the flip side, I talk myself out of the fact that everybody I love is not going to die. The tree in my front yard is not going to crash through my house when I'm sleeping if I close my eyes. And it's a constant thing. People who live with generalized anxiety are constantly having to walk ourselves out of anxious thoughts and panic attacks and then talk ourselves into basic human reaction and interactions, which, is crazy. So the end result here for me, and I don't know if it was just the fact that we were in a pandemic or the election was so crazy or, my age is increasing and my hormones are raging, but this year, recently, I went back on medicine. I'm not ashamed of that. It was a decision that I did not take lightly. I talked with my doctor, I talked with my therapist, and that was the best decision because I was doing all the other things, but I was still having a hard time to the point where my sleep was being constantly interrupted. The second I laid down, I would easily spend an hour in bed just worried about what? It didn't matter. It was the same thing every night. I would wake up in the middle of the night, then I couldn't go back to sleep. I was having to fight my way out of panic attacks way more frequently than I had been over probably the last 9 years. And, it got to the point where it was pretty apparent that it just wasn't, what I was doing wasn't working anymore. I think it's important that we take inventory pretty frequently of what we're doing and how it's working. Obviously, over the course of, my 34 years in each phase of life, it's looked a lot different. And, I've had to change up how that works. Therapy is a big deal. When I first saw a therapist, I was 21. I was not ready for that shit. I did not take it serious. I didn't want to be there. I was pretty much forced to be there. And at the time, I really wanted all of my trauma to stay where it was. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to talk about it. And I just wasn't ready, so it wasn't beneficial. When I finally made my way back to therapy again in my mid-20s, I was ready to feel better. I was not ready to do the work. So again, I wouldn't call that a huge success. I did half of the work, kind of, but it wasn't a home run by any means. And when I finally made my way back in my 30s, I was ready. I was so ready that I feel like my poor therapist needs a therapist just because of me. I had a lot to say, but I was ready, and it was important. And the best way I can describe that is like when you finally get into, a routine of therapy and are ready and able and want the help, it's like taking off a book bag at the end of a long day. You really do feel a lot better, but you also have to be really ready for that or it's not going to be beneficial. I don't think, as far as stigma goes, I think we're in a better place now than we ever have been in my lifetime. I think people are way more open to talking about it with each other. I don't think I had a conversation about my anxiety, an honest conversation with myself or anyone else until I was in my mid to late 20s. I didn't talk about it. I'm just having a bad day or I'm just in a funk or whatever. But not only did I not have a serious conversation with myself or anyone else about it until that late in life, I had definitely been experiencing hardcore shit. I had driven myself to the hospital more than one time for a panic attack. yeah, I still couldn't talk about it. And once I got into therapy, there was a lot of stuff that I had never said to another human being sober until I went. And that's also baffling. You know, by the time I got back in it this time, I was 32, 33, 33 years old. And there was a lot of stuff that I never said out loud with my mouth to another human that was tremendously impacting my everyday life. That's insane. You know, my greatest hope, you know, my daughter's 10, and we probably talk about mental health stuff easily once a week, maybe more. You know, I really hope that as the generations behind us get older and they have kids and so on and so forth, it becomes a thing where it's not a big deal to tell your friends or loved ones, yo, I'm having a hard time right now. You know, I need help, or I need you to back up off me for a minute and let me sort it out, or whatever. I also, you know, feel like, I'm not going to say it's entirely perfect, but there is less of a stigma about people being on pharmaceuticals for it. There is no shame. However you choose to handle your shit, if it works for you, that's what you need to be doing. I don't care if it's holistic, if it's pharmaceutical, if it's doing a combination of this, that, or the other. If it works for you, that's what you need to be doing. And I feel like the farther we go with it, you'll see more and more groups of people who are willing to discuss it. Like I said, my mom only, when I was an adult, mentioned to me that she'd had horrendous postpartum. I had that. She never told me that when I was going through it. You know, my grandma, after one of my terrible panic attacks, mentioned that she had them her whole life. Didn't talk about it. Yeah, so I definitely try to make it a point to spend all of my time talking about it. As far, circling back to therapy, if you are considering going to therapy, I think that's fantastic. I also think that choosing your therapist is a lot like choosing your yoga instructor. Not everybody's going to be the fit for you. Sometimes it's going to take 2 or 3 to, you know, figure out the person who is best for you. And sometimes that can be discouraging. You know, you're like, I made the jump to come here. I don't feel any better. This person is not vibing with me, and that's discouraging. So stick with it. I know even this most recent time when I got back into it, I love my therapist. But after the first one, I was like, I'm not fucking doing this again. I did. But I was mad, and I didn't want to. And even now, some weeks, I'm like, this shit's ridiculous. I'm not doing it. But I do, and then I feel better. Again, I have a ton of things I could say about this because it's just such a huge part of my life, really. It dictates so much of what I do and how I behave and how I feel. And we might do another one of these where we talk about certain things more in depth. But for now, if you have any questions or if you want any resources or if you just want to share your experience, then I hope you leave a comment or message me directly, and we'll talk soon. I hope you guys all have a great week this week. I've listed all of this week's classes. I'm getting back to working on the virtual platform. But until then, have a great week. Bye, friends.